Daf Yomi, Daf Yomi, oh Daf Diggy Yomi, Daf Diggy Yomi, Daf Diggy Yomi, Daf Diggy Yomi. Tractate Shevuos, page 34a. On top of the page, Daf Lamedal, Domin Aleph, Kolachas Viachas, Bebezdin. Shelo b'fnei bezdin menaver ela b'taviyas mamoin edus shelo yasa banash mikanash mikoyim gechoykim sun geshem en chay v'kachas b'nei bezdin eino din shelo yehei menaver ela b'taviyas mamoin. Each and every oath, if the plaintiff administered several oaths to him and he denied having the deposit in his possession, whether he took the oath before a court or not before a court, and despite the broad application of the halakha, the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving a monetary claim. Then in the case of an oath of testimony with regard to which the Torah did not render the halachic status of women like that of men, the status of relatives like that of non-relatives, the status of unfit witnesses like that of those fit to testify, and he is liable to bring only one sliding scale offering if the plaintiff administered several oaths to him, and he falsely denied knowledge of the matter in the presence of a court. Is it not right that the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving a monetary claim? Ma lepikadon shikein lo asaboy mushba kenishba mezik shoigi ketoimer beedus shikein. The Breita rejects this inference. What is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that, with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halachic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, as one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt. And the Torah did not render the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Will you say that the same is true with regard to an oath of testimony? As in that case, the Torah rendered the halachic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, and it rendered the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath, and one is liable to bring an offering in both instances. Talmud Lomar, techeta l'gzera shava, never kan techeta, v'never la'alon techeta, ma le'al enu medaber, ela b'tvias mamon, afkan enu medaber, Therefore, the verse states the term shall sin with regard to an oath of testimony and states shall sin with regard to an oath on a deposit in order to derive a verbal analogy. Here, it is stated with regard to an oath of testimony shall sin, Leviticus 5:1. And there it is stated with regard to an oath on a deposit shall sin, Leviticus 5:21. Just as there concerning an oath on deposit, let's raise it up. The verse is speaking only with regard to a monetary claim. So to here concerning the oath of testimony, the verse is speaking only with regard to a monetary claim. Maskiv Rabba Baula. O ביטוי יוכיחו שהן רואים ויש עמהן שבועה עמהן כהן ואין עמהן כהן ומדברים שלא בתחילת ממון. After presenting the different proofs cited in the Breita, the Gemara proceeds to analyze the opinions cited therein, beginning with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that one derives that one is liable for an oath of testimony only if it involves a monetary claim from the case of an oath on a deposit based on multiple instances of the term or that appear in both contexts. And there is an oath with whose multiple instances of the term or, and there is no priest in their context. Rabbi Bar Ula objects to this. The multiple instances of the term or in the verse, or if anyone shall take an oath to clearly express with his lips to do evil or to do good, Leviticus 5:4, which is written with regard to an oath on an utterance, will prove that one is liable even without a monetary claim, as there are multiple instances of the term or, and there is an oath in their context, and there is no priest in their context. And they are not speaking with regard to a monetary claim. The Gemara rejects this. It stands to reason. It stands to reason. Yeah. That he should have derived the halakha with regard to it. Nice. It stands to reason, 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 it stands to reason that he should have derived the halakha. Should have derived the halakha from, with regard to an oath, testimony from an oath on a deposit, and not from an oath on an utterance due to the verbal analogy between the terms shall sin and shall sin. Okay. The Gemara rejects this. On the contrary, he should have decided the halakha with regard to an oath of testimony from the halakha with regard to an oath of utterance, as it is a derivation of one case for which one is liable to bring a sin offering for taking a false oath, from another case from which one is liable to bring a sin offering for taking a false oath. This is in contrast to an oath on a deposit, for which one is liable to bring a guilt offering for taking a false oath. Rather, it stands to reason, another stands to reason. This is nice. It stands to reason that he should have derived the halakha with regard to an oath. Oath of testimony from the halakha with regard to an oath on a deposit, as there are many elements common to both oaths, represented by the mnemonic sin, intentionally claimed from him, denied his claim, and his past. There is a verbal analogy between them, as the term shall sin appears in both contexts. In both cases, one is liable for taking a false oath intentionally. Additionally, in both cases, there is a claim presented by one of the parties and denial of that claim by the one taking the oath. And both oaths relate to events that transpired in the past. Okay? Stands to reason. It stands to reason. Okay? All right. On the contrary, maybe to have a the Gemara asks, on the contrary, he should have derived the halakha with regard to an oath of testimony from the halakha with regard to an oath of utterance, as there are many elements common to both oaths, represented by the mnemonic sin offering that descended to 1/5. In both cases, one is liable to bring a sin offering for a false oath, as opposed to a guilt offering for a false oath on a deposit. In each case, the offering is a sliding scale offering as opposed to the fixed offering in the case of an oath on a deposit. In both cases, there is no payment of an additional 1/5 for taking a false oath. And in the case of a false oath on a deposit, there is payment of an additional 1/5. The Gemara answers, these elements common to an oath of testimony and an oath on a deposit are more numerous than the elements common to an oath of testimony and an oath on an utterance. Rabbi Akiva Omer, והיה כי יש שם לחס מאלה, יש מאלה שהוא חייב, יש מאלה שהוא פטור. כיצד? תבוא ממון, חייב, תבוא דבר אחר פטור. Rabbi Akiva says that it is written with regard to the oath, to an oath of testimony, and it shall be when he will be guilty of one of these, Leviticus 5:5. The term of these is a restrictive expression from which it is derived. There are some of these for which he is liable, and there are some of these for which he is exempt. How so? If the plaintiff demanded testimony from the witness with regard to a monetary claim, the witness is liable for taking a false oath. If the plaintiff demanded testimony from the witness with regard to another matter, he is exempt. The Gemara challenges, since it is not clear from the verse for which claim one is liable and for which claim one is exempt, I will reverse it and say that one is liable only when the claim was with regard to another matter, not when it involves monetary matters. Rabbi Akiva, A'oin de Rabbi Eliezer Samich. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Akiva relies on the multiple instances of the term or, as cited by Rabbi Eliezer, to derive from an oath on a deposit, that is, that one is liable only for a false oath that involves a monetary claim. From the term of these, Rabbi Akiva derives that there are some cases involving monetary claims for which one is not liable for taking a false oath of testimony. My benayu, bein Rabbi Eliezer, bein Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva with regard to which cases involving monetary claims does Rabbi Akiva hold that one is not liable for taking a false oath of testimony? Ika benayu, Mashbia Ele Karaka, Rabbi Eliezer Chayavin, Rabbi Akiva Torah. The Gemara answers, the practical difference between their opinions is, in the case of one who administers an oath to witness with regard to testimony involving land. According to Rabbi Eliezer, they are liable if they take a false oath. According to Rabbi Akiva, they are exempt in that case, as it is excluded by the term of these. Rabbi Yochanan, Devrahasam Mashbia Ele Karaka, Filu, Rabbi Eliezer B'Turin, Al-Chamai, Ika, Bein, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says there with regard to an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony, that in the case of one who administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving land, the witnesses are exempt, even according to Rabbi Eliezer. What difference is there between the opinions of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? Ika benayu edei. The Gemara answers, the practical difference between their opinions is in the case where one administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving a fine. According to Rabbi Eliezer, they are liable, and according to Rabbi Akiva, they are exempt. Rabbi Yosef Lili Omer v'hu eid o ra'a o yada be'edus hamiskayemes b'ri'io v'lo yedio u'vedia v'lo re'ia kazu b'daber. Rabbi Yosef Lili cites a different proof and says the verse states with regard to an oath of testimony, and he is a witness, or he saw, or he knew. Leviticus 5:1. It is with regard to testimony that is founded on sight without knowledge of the matter, or by means of knowledge without sight, that the verse is speaking. The reference is to testimony involving monetary matters, as all other testimony requires both knowledge and sight. גם על האוכל בין הגמלים ונמצא גם על הרוג ביצידו, בידוע שזה הרגו, דאי איסלה דרבי אחא בדין נפשוס, נמי משכחס לה, כרבי שמעון בן שטח. Rav Papa said to Abaya, shall we say that Rabbi Yosef really does not accept the opinion of Rabbi Acha, as it is taught in Braita to Sefta Bava Kama 3:6, that Rabbi Acha says if there is a rutting male camel that is rampaging among other camels, and then a camel is found killed at its side, it is evident that this rampaging camel killed it, and the owner must pay for the damage. Rav Acha rules that cases of monetary law can be decided based on circumstantial evidence, as if he is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Acha, that witnesses may testify on the basis of circumstantial evidence. In cases of capital law, too, you find a case of knowledge without sight, as in the case discussed by Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. Tanya, for we learned in the Bible, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach, Ara ben Nechama, Yarae ben Nechama, Im lo re'iti, Echad sherazach mechaver lechurva, ורצתי אחריו מצאתי סייח בידו ודם מטפטף והרוג מפרפר. אמרתי לו, רשע, מי הרגו לזה? או אני או אתה? As it is taught in Braita, that Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach said, in the form of an oath, I will not see the consolation of Israel if I do not see one who was running after another into a ruin, and I ran after him, and I found a sword in his hand, and blood dripping from the sword, and the slain person convulsing. I said to him, wicked one, who killed this person? It was either me or you, and there is no one else here. Aval ma e'aseh she'en damcha masur biyadi, she'rei ha'matayra al pi shtayim eidim o shlosh eidim yilmos hameis, ela ha'makom yipara mimcha. Amru lo zazu misham ad she'nashchu v'met. But what can I do, as your blood is not given to my control, because I have no jurisdiction to execute you? As the Torah states, on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses shall he that is to die to be put to death. Why didn't Jesus just quote that to the adulterous woman? You know, that's a big question. It's a question I have. I usually don't ask these kind of questions right here, but I think now it's really appropriate. So if you've made it this far, congratulations, you're going to hear something different. In the New Testament, there's written a story that they, meaning the Jewish people at the time, religious leaders or what have you, brought a woman caught in adultery in the very act. Okay? In the very act. And they caught her, and they brought her to Jesus, and they said to him, Rabbi, what do we do with this woman? We caught her in the very act. Moses said we have to stone this woman, or kill this woman, put her to death, or whatever. And why didn't Jesus just say to them, on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses, where are the witnesses? We need a court. You know that I'm not a court. We have to have a trial according to your own law. Why was the whole drama? Did the drama have to happen of where he wrote in the sand, and then he said, whoever is without sin cast the first stone, and then no one cast the first stone, and they all left. But he could have gotten out of it very easily by saying, I can't put anyone to death. You know that. We need to have the best in here. Where are the witnesses? Bring the witnesses. Testify. We all learned Daf Yomi about Sanhedrin. Do you know how much interrogation of witnesses? You have to interrogate the witnesses. Why are you coming to me? That's a question I had. I thought about that, and I don't know what the answer is. So, if you have an answer, please let me know. Deuteronomy 17:6, and there are no witnesses here. Rather, the omnipresent will exact retribution from you. The sages said they did not move from there until a snake came and bit the pursuer and he died. Rav Acha, who would hold that in that case the pursuer could be executed by the court based on circumstantial evidence. Ostensibly, Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees, as he says that testimony based on knowledge without sight exists only in cases of monetary law. Afilu tema isle Rabbi Acha Bishlom Yedia Belo Yedia Mishkachas La Ela Ria Belo Yedia Hechi Mishkachas La Milo Mimamida Im Goy Harag Im Yisrael Harag Im Adam Treva Harag O Shalim Harag. The Gemara answers, even if you say that Rabbi Yosef is of the opinion that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Acha, that one may rely on circumstantial evidence in the cases of capital law, one may nevertheless distinguish between cases of monetary law and cases of capital law. Granted, even in cases of capital law, you find testimony based on knowledge without sight. But how can you find a case of sight without knowledge? Don't the witnesses need to know if the one whom he witnessed killing another killed a Gentile or he killed a Jew? If he killed one who has a wound that would have caused him to die within 12 months, or if he killed one whose body is intact? Shema mina kasav Rabbi Yossi Aglili mashbia edei knas pato de'isal kedai dechayav nihidedi velo reyesh kachan la reiya velo yedia milo ba'emida goya bal bas Yisrael ba'al betulat be'ulat ba'al. The Gemara notes, concludes from it that Rabbi Yosef really holds that in the case where one administers an oath to witnesses with regard to testimony involving a fine, the witnesses are exempt from liability for taking a false oath of testimony. As if it enters your mind to say that the witnesses are liable, although you find testimony with regard to fines based on knowledge without sight, and witnesses may testify based on circumstantial evidence in cases of sight without knowledge. When it comes to fines, don't the witnesses need to know if the violator, the arpist, engaged in intercourse with a Gentile woman, or if he engaged in intercourse with a Jewish woman? If he engaged in intercourse with a virgin, or if he engaged in intercourse with a non-virgin? Rabbi Yosef really holds that witnesses are liable for taking a false oath of testimony only in cases where both testimony based on sight alone and testimony based on knowledge alone are accepted, which is not the case concerning testimony involving fines. Yasiv Rav Hamnuna Kamen Rav Yehuda B'Yasiv Rav Yehuda K'Vekomim Ba'ele Mana Minitich B'Ifnei Ploni Ploni. Apropos, the matter of sight without knowledge in cases of monetary law, the Gemara relates Rav Hamnuna was sitting before Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda was sitting, and he was raising a dilemma. If one demands payment from another and claims, I countered for you and gave you 100 dinars in the presence of so-and-so and so-and-so, and now we're turning to 34b. Okay, my top of the page, 34b, top of the page, the words my. And the witnesses see him counting the money from the outside. What is the halacha? Is their testimony accepted? Amar le Rav Hamnuna v'halama to'en I amar lo hayu dvar me'olam v'chuzak kafar I amar in shkali v'didi shkali yatu edim mai habe Amar le Hamnuna at ulta Rav Hamnuna said to Yehuda, what does the other person claim in response to the demand for repayment? If he says these matters never happened, he assumes the presumptive status of the denier of the truth, as the witnesses testify that they saw the claimant counting the money and giving it to him. If he says, yes, I took money from him, but it is my money that I took, then when the witnesses come and testify, they saw the claimant counting the money and giving it to him, what of it? The testimony of the witnesses does not contradict his claim, as the witnesses do not know the circumstances under which the money changed hands. Yehuda said to him, are you Hamnuna? Enter and come into the study hall as you make your teacher wiser. Hahu de'amar le'lechavre mana maniti lecha b'tzad amud ze amar le'lo avat b'tzad amud ze adu drei sahad yasidu be'deishtin mayim b'tzad amud ze amar ishlakish u'chzak kafran. The Gemara relates a similar incident. There was a certain individual who said to another, I counted for you and gave you 100 dinars as a loan alongside this column. The other person said to him in response, I did not pass alongside this column. 2 witnesses came and testified about him that they saw that he urinated alongside this column. Reish Lakish said, he assumes the presumptive status of the denier of truth as the testimony of witnesses prove that he passed alongside the column. But why does he have to urinate against the thing? I mean, what's up with that? Why do you gotta throw that in there? Maskiv Lav Nachman Haidina Pasa who Miko Amar Meolam Be'esik Zeh Kamar Le. Rav Nachman objects to this, that is a ruling characteristic of a Persian court, not a reasonable ruling of characteristic of a Jewish court. Did the respondent say that he never passed alongside the column? It was that he did not pass alongside the column in the context of this matter that he said to him that he did not pass the column. Therefore, the testimony of the witnesses does not contradict the statement. There are those who say that the incident transpired a bit differently. There was a certain individual who said to another, I counted for you and gave you 100 dinars as a loan alongside this column. The other person said to him in response, I never passed alongside this column. Witnesses emerged and testified concerning him that he urinated alongside the column. This is insane. Rav Nachman said he assumes the presumptive status of denier of truth as the witnesses contradicted his claim. Okay. Amar le Rav Nachman kol mitzvah yale diinish aved la vela daite. Rav said to Rav Nachman, there is no proof from here that he assumes the presumptive status of a denier as any matter that is not incumbent upon a person to remember. He performs it and it is not on his mind. Therefore, when he denied or ever passing the column, it was because there was never any reason for him to remember that he had been there. He just urinated there. I think anyone who urinated somewhere would remember where he, you know what I'm saying? Okay. Rav Shimon Omer, Chayav Khan, Chayav Begadolim Kule. The Gemara proceeds to cite the opinion cited last in the right to explain the source of the halacha that one is liable for taking a false oath of testimony only for a case involving monetary matter. Rav Shimon says the Torah rendered one liable if he takes a false oath here with regard to an oath of testimony, and the Torah rendered one liable if he takes a false oath with regard to an oath on a deposit, just as there the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving monetary claims. So to here, the verse is speaking of liability only in cases involving monetary claims. They mocked this proof in the West, meaning in Eretz Israel. The Gemara asked, what is worthy of mockery in the statement of Rabbi Shimon? You shouldn't mock anybody, saying, let alone Rabbi Shimon. Let alone Rav Shimon. The Ketani might believe it in Shekol. She came no asabo bushba kenish ba mezik. The Gemara explains that they mocked that which the Brisa teaches in the continuation, rejecting the a fortiori inference suggested by Rabbi Shimon. What is notable about the case of a deposit, it is notable in that with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halachic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others, like that of the one who himself took an oath. As one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt, the Torah did not render the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Mechte mushma bias wages of Shimon Nale. Diga manu bikadon nami mushma biacherem nigmorvedus. This rejection is difficult. Now, with regard to the fact that one who administered an oath to himself is liable in the case of an oath of testimony, from where is it derived according to Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon derives it by means of a verbal analogy from an oath on a deposit. If so, based on the same verbal analogy in the case of an oath on a deposit, too, let us derive from the case of an oath of testimony the fact that one is liable for a false oath that was administered by others. My chuka. Dil Rabbi Shimon mikal v'choimer. My sile mipi acherim chayav. Mipi asbun lo koshchen. The Gemara rejects this. And what is worthy of mockery in that statement? Perhaps Rabbi Shimon does not derive that one who takes a false oath of testimony on his own is liable by means of a verbal analogy from an oath on a deposit. Rather, he derives it by means of an a fortiori inference if one is liable for a false oath of testimony administered by others. Is it not all the more so that he is liable for an oath that he takes on his own? The Gemara answers, rather, the mockery is with regard to the distinction between an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony in the matter of whether the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath is like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. As it teaches in the Braita, what is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that, with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halachic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, as one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt. The Torah did not render the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Mechdi mezid amedus ben ale. Now, from where does he derive that one who takes an intentional false oath and testimony is liable? He derives it as it is not written in the context of an oath of testimony, and it is hidden here too. It is not written in the context of an oath on a deposit, and it is hidden. Therefore, there should be no distinction between intentional and unwitting with regard to an oath on a deposit either. Amar Lohu Avona, Maichu Katil Amazing Lam Kashoy Vikadon, Mimila Rabbi Shimon, Rav Huna said to the sages, and what is worthy of mockery in that statement? Perhaps the fact that the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath is not like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath in the case of a deposit, and it is from the halakha of misuse of consecrated property that Rabbi Shimon derived it. Just as one is liable to bring a guilt offering for the misuse of consecrated property, only if he did not do so willingly, one is liable to bring a guilt offering for a false oath on a deposit, only if he unwillingly took the false oath. The Gemara answers, and that is what is worthy of mockery. Instead of deriving the lack of liability for an intentional false oath of deposit from the case of misuse of consecrated property, let him derive liability for an intentional false oath on a deposit from the case of an oath of testimony. The Gemara rejects this. It stands to reason. Third time, it stands to reason. It stands to reason. This is on B though, that's the only thing. This is B. It stands to reason. It stands to reason. Stands to reason. It stands to reason. 3-4B. It stands to reason. Stands to reason. It stands to reason. Stands to reason. In the season. There's a reason for the season. Don't ask me how I know it. If you take the time to see, someone will take the time to show it. The Gemara rejects this. He stands to reason that he should have it derived from the case of misuse of consecrated property, as that is a derivation of misuse written with regard to an oath on a deposit. If anyone shall sin and commits an act of misuse and dealt falsely with his colleague in a manner of deposit, Leviticus 5:21, which is derived from misuse written with regard to misuse of consecrated property. If anyone commits an act of misuse and sinned unwittingly from items consecrated to the Lord, Leviticus 5:15. Adarabbe. Be'edus havela lemeilaf shekechet the Gemara asks, on the contrary, he should have derived from the case of an oath of testimony, as that is a derivation of shall sin, written with regard to an oath on a deposit, which is derived from shall sin, written with regard to an oath of testimony. And if anyone shall sin, and he hears the voice of the oath, and he is a witness, Leviticus 5:1. The Gemara rejects this. It stands to reason. Another stands to reason. Well, should we copy this one too? Stands to reason. Very repetitive stuff. It's like one basic idea and it's just repeating. If I can get the flow of this thing, stands to reason. Stands to reason. Stands to reason. It stands to reason that from the case of misuse of consecrated property, you should have derived it, as there are many elements common to an oath of deposit. Misuse of consecrated property represented by the mnemonic. Okay, as there are many elements common to an oath on a deposit and misuse of consecrated property, which is called me'ilah, represented by the mnemonic misuse, and then with regard to all, then derived benefit with fixed 1/5 and guilt offering. The term misuse is employed in both cases. Both cases are relevant with regard to all individuals, and not only those fit to testify. Both involve one deriving benefit from property that is not his. In both cases, one is liable to bring a fixed guilt offering, as opposed to one who takes a false oath of testimony, who is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. In both cases, one adds 1/5 to the payment of the principal. In both cases, that is the offering with which one gains atonement. Adirabe, adirabe, adirabe. Okay, we're almost done. Adirabe is how the Elef she came to Hezer Shvuoti by Rechavdamios Bioin. The Gemara rejects this. On the contrary, he should have derived the halakha with regard to an oath on a deposit from the halakha of an oath of testimony, as there are many elements common to both oaths represented by the mnemonic. Sin, ordinary, with an oath claimed from him, denied his claim in multiple instances of the term or. The term shall sin is written in both contexts. Both oaths relate to the property of ordinary individuals, not to consecrated property. In both cases, there is a claim presented by one of the parties and denial of that claim by the one taking the oath. Multiple instances of the term or appear in both passages in the Torah. The Gemara explains that these elements common to an oath on a deposit and misuse of consecrated property are more numerous than the elements common to an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony. Rather, after resolving all the difficulties that were raised against the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, the question remains: what did the sage of Eretz Yisrael find that was worthy of mockery in that Braita? Ki asra papa Rav Huna bereid al Yehoshua be'rav amr haynu chuka mechti Rabbi Shimon gezera shava gamir lama le deparich ma al begadon sheken lo asa bo mushba kinishba mezit kashogeg. When Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Yehoshua, came from the study hall of their teacher, they said, "This is what is worthy of mockery." Now, since ultimately Rabbi Shimon derives the halacha by means of a verbal analogy between the term shall sin, written with regard to an oath and a deposit, the term shall sin, written with regard to an oath of testimony. Why is it that he refutes the parallel between them by saying, what is notable about the case of a deposit? It is notable in that, with regard to a deposit, the Torah did not render the halachic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others like that of one who himself took an oath, as one to whom an oath was administered by others is exempt, and the Torah did not render the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Rabbi Shimon should have derived by means of the verbal analogy all that the halachot of an oath of testimony and the halachot of an oath on deposit are identical. The Gemara rejects this, and what is worthy of mockery in that statement? Perhaps when Rabbi Shimon refuted the parallel between the two oaths, it was prior to the verbal analogy being established for him, and the derivation was by means of a paradigm. After the verbal analogy was established for him, he does not refute the parallel and holds that in the case of an oath on a deposit, one is liable to bring a guilt offering for false oaths administered by others, as well as for intentional false oaths. V'la l'amar lahu Rav bar Itai l'Ramanan man Tanash. What did you get? Zedona lechavara. Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Shimon not refute the parallel between the two oaths? But did Rav bar Itai say to the sages, who is the Tana who taught with regard to an oath on a deposit that atonement by means of an offering is not possible for one who takes an intentional false oath? It is Rabbi Shimon. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon concludes that there remains a distinction between intentional and unwitting in the case of an oath on a deposit. The Gemara suggests perhaps with regard to the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath being like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Rabbi Shimon refutes the parallel between the two oaths even after the verbal analogy is established for him, as he derives the halacha of an oath on a deposit from the halacha of misuse of consecrated property, where there is a distinction between intentional and unwitting, as those elements common to an oath on a deposit and misuse of consecrated property are more numerous than the elements common to an oath on a deposit and an oath of testimony. But he does not refute the parallel between the two oaths with the claim that there is a distinction between them and with regard to whether the halachic status of one to whom an oath was administered by others is like that of one who himself took an oath. Once the verbal analogy was established for him, there is no longer a distinction between the two oaths in that regard. It's the Gemara asks, if according to Rabbi Shimon, based on the derivation from the misuse of consecrated property, one who intentionally takes a false oath on a deposit does not bring a guilt offering like one who took the false oath unwittingly, let the discussion of the case of an oath of testimony return to the verbal analogy and derive it from the case of an oath on a deposit. That the halachic status of one who takes an intentional false oath is not like that of one who takes an unwitting false oath. Just as in the case of an oath on a deposit, one who takes an unwitting false oath, yes, he is liable to bring a guilt offering, and one who takes an intentional false oath, no, he is not liable. So too in the case of an oath of testimony, one who takes an unwitting false oath, yes, he is liable to bring a sin offering, and one who takes an unintentional false oath, no, he is not liable, just as he derives the case of an oath on a deposit from the case of misuse on consecrated property.